Morning, everyone. Today's learning is dedicated in memory of as follows: Mordechai ben Alexander Harris, Zvi ben Osach HaKohen Meir, Yosef ben Harav Yisrael Dov Finkelstone, Nosson ben Meir ben Shimon HaKohen Cohen, Yosef ben Yisrael Yukutelka, Chana Bas Asun Friedman, Toba Marian Bas Yaakov Sinclair, Anshul ben Yisrael Waterman, Chaim ben Dov ben Zain, as well as the regulars that we say: Leah Bas Bible, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh, Tzivia ben Bas Mordechai, Avram ben David Slavin, Shlomo ben Yisrael Morris, Sephora Fegel Bas Reuben Baruch, Shan ben Eleli ben Bas Bible from Rosh Hashanah Bas Yaakov Shmuel, Caleb Vela Bas Henoch Yirmiyahu Chio ben Moshe Eliezer, Sarah Malka Bas Ben Yomin. Good morning to everyone. Hope you are well, looking after yourselves. This morning we move on to the next of the paths to God, which are enumerated by Rabbi Lord Sachs Zichrona Livracha. This morning, the one that we are going to be looking at is tzedakah, charity. Charity is something that we are all familiar with. We take pride in the generosity of spirit that our community shows and we as individuals show. So let's read what he says about the mitzvah of tzedakah. Firstly, what does the word tzedakah mean? Tzedakah means to do what is just, what is right. Okay, so that is different to chesed, as we will see. There are two kinds of mitzvot, says Rabbi Sachs. There are the commands of self-restraint that hold us back from damaging the human or natural environment. There are positive commandments of love for the world as God's work and for human beings as God's image. Of the second, the greatest is tzedakah, love as justice, or sometimes translated as charity. The world is not always just or equitable or fair. Our task is to make it more so by helping those in need, sharing some of what we have with others. The act of sharing is more than just charity. It is a recognition of the fact that what we have comes from God. One of the conditions of God's gifts is that we ourselves give. That way we too become like God, walking in his ways. We'll have to see what that means in a minute. The market creates wealth. That is its virtue, but it does not necessarily distribute it in a way to alleviate poverty, granting everyone the means of a dignified life. That is the market's weakness. So there are two possibilities: either abandon the market or mitigate its negative effects. The first have been tried and failed, right? If we think about communism and the like. The second can be done in two ways: through the government by taxation or welfare, or through the individuals. Governments can do much, but not everything. Tzedakah, charity, is Judaism's way of saying that each of us has a part to play. Every one of us must give. We'll discuss this in a minute. Tzedakah means both justice and charity because we believe that they go hand in hand. So again, tzedakah means both justice and charity. We say tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. You're meant to pursue righteousness, as opposed to charity, which is also referred to as tzedakah. We'll see the difference of what they mean soon. Justice is impersonal. Charity is personal. We call God Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. A king dispenses justice. A parent gives a child a gift out of love. Giving to others is one of the most beautiful things that we can do, and one of the most creative. We create possibilities for other people. We soften some of the rough edges of the world. We help alleviate poverty and pain. We give God the sacrifice he most desires of us, that we honor his image in other people. So let me just finish off. Sorry, I didn't notice there was another paragraph on the other page, short paragraph. Nothing more marks Judaism as a religion of love than its emphasis on tzedakah. We do not accept poverty, hunger, homelessness, or disease as God's will. To the contrary, God's will is that we heal these fractures to his world. As God feeds the hungry, so must we. As God heals the sick, so must we. We become good by doing good. We walk in God's ways by acting out of love. Let's now discuss some of the concepts which Rabbi Sachs has written so beautifully in his essay on tzedakah. So, tzedakah, charity. So one of the first things to recognize, and he did uh, allude to this, is the fact that the world was created with intentionally with each person being unable to be self-sufficient. Doesn't matter who it is, there is an interdependence, a codependence between each and every one of us with other people, right? It doesn't matter whether somebody's wealthy, it doesn't matter what they have. They cannot create and make everything that they need for themselves. And therefore, they become reliant on other people, and other people become reliant on them. And God intentionally made it that way, so that there would be this cooperation, this collaboration between each and every one of us in building this world. And God also made this world in a way that there should be those which are in need and those which have. And the idea is that there is this relationship between the two. God, there is always going to be differences in the distribution of wealth. But the idea is that we are meant to play our role in trying to alleviate any type of suffering and poverty in the world. Why? Why is it our role? Well, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we have already mentioned many times before that we are meant to, the fact that there is a spirit of God inside us. God from time immemorial made us partners in creation. He made us in his image, right? And therefore we're meant to be like him. Now, how can we be like him? He's an infinite being. Well, by taking on and acting in a similar fashion. In other words, the same characteristics, the same midot that he has, right? Mahu, Racham v'chan, and just as God is merciful and kind, so we are meant to emulate God's ways. And one of the main ways that we can do that is by being charitable, right? So charitable, the word charity doesn't mean that we are doing kindness. Kindness is something that is not required, not necessary, is going above and beyond. But tzedakah comes from the word what is right or just. It is doing what is expected of us. In other words, that we recognize whatever we have, it's a gift from above, right? However much we feel that we are the ones that earned it, we made it, we're self-made. In reality, it's all a blessing from the Almighty. And I can give countless examples of people that from one day to the next went from rags to riches and then from riches to rags. It can happen. And so therefore we should recognize that whatever we have is from God. And therefore, one of the ways that we do that is by listening to his will. And that means giving to others less fortunate than ourselves. It is a basic requirement in Judaism to give charity. There are two types of charity. There is a charity for those which put their hands out, or we hear about needy cases. And then there is the general principle that whatever we have, we should take off some and put it to one side and then distribute it to worthy causes when the need arises. So that's point number one. Now, the highest level of charity, he didn't discuss about the different levels of charity, not in this particular piece. We know that the lowest level is where somebody comes to you and they ask you for money, and then you give them some money. That is the lowest level that Maimonides writes about. But there are 8 levels. And the highest level, of course, is when one gives somebody else a job. One gives them a parnasa so that they are no longer reliant on tzedakah, on charity. But the level below that is where I recognize a need in somebody else before that person has to go around asking for it. And anonymously, the level below that is where I give anonymously, and the person doesn't know that who they've received it from. So, for example, through a third party, I say, can you distribute this to somebody who needs it? That person is the intermediary. They pass it on or put it through the envelope, through the letterbox, and therefore I don't know who's getting and they don't know who's receiving. But below that, there is another level where, let's say, I know of a needy case, and I, for example, will completely, anonymously, will put an envelope through somebody's door or make sure that something is paid for. Therefore, I haven't shamed them. That's one of the reasons why the higher levels of charity are all about being anonymous, because there is shame when one has to ask for one's needs. Whereas if it is that, for example, if the needs are taken care of, then that, of course, alleviates the person from going through the shame and embarrassment of having to put their hand up, having to ask, right, for help. So that is the incredible thing. And in fact, we have an amazing story. We don't need to look much further than our own community for an incredible story as to how this has been manifest for the last 20, 30 years. Many of you that are joining us this morning, and I must say good morning to everyone, to Peter, Carol, Eitan, Harry, Caroline, David, Estelle, and Rachel, amongst others. There is the Rayburns Trust. Now, the Rayburns Trust was set up, was started by a man whose name was Ray Burns, a member of our community. He was a regular guy, a nice guy, but what he did that was extraordinary was that he heard about certain people in the community that were struggling. And what he did is he literally would go from one side of the shul to the other, and he knew who to ask. And he would say, listen, we've got cases in our community that are very hard up. Is it possible that I could come and see you, in a week, and perhaps you could help? And they said yes. And he would put it in an envelope, and then he would put those envelopes through people's doors. And there was no shame and embarrassment, because again, the person who was receiving never knew who they were receiving it from. The person who was giving never knew who they were giving it to. So that level of that lofty level of charity, in fact, is something that is a cornerstone in our own community for the last 20 years. We take it for granted, that when there are cases of need, then we can turn to the Rayburns Trust, but it's a phenomenal facility, and we are blessed. And I would encourage people that are able to and do want to make a donation, then it is a wonderful resource to use. So we're going to continue our discussion about Rabbi Sacks's pillar of charity. We'll continue it tomorrow. So we mentioned about the idea of walking in God's ways, the idea that we don't look at people and say, well, that's tough luck. That's the way it works. God created all of us and created this world, and it's up to him to alleviate poverty. No, we're partners, co-creators in creation, and therefore it's as much our responsibility as it is God's. And therefore we have to do everything we can in a dignified fashion to help those less fortunate than ourselves. To be continued, as I said. Continue now with Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Memorial prayer. Adon Olamim Zacho Es Nishmos Leah Bas Vaiva Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Ben David Aryeh Sivia Bas Mordechai Abram Ben David Slavin Shalom Ben Yisrael Mois Super Fegel Bas Ruben Baruch Shalom Ben Elili Ben Bas Vaiva Prem Rosh Hashanah Bas Yaakov Shmo Kela Bela Ben Bas Henoch Yirmiyahu Chiel Ben Moshe Eliezer Saramaka Bas Ben Yomin. Your sites for today. Mordechai Ben Alexander Harris Tzvi Ben Osach Ben HaKohen Meir Yosef Ben Rav Yisachar Dov Finkelstein Nosson Ben Shimon Cohen, Yosef Ben Yisrael Kodalka, Chana Bas Sassoon Friedman, and Tova Marian Bas Yaakov Sinclair, Anshel Ben Yisrael Waterman, Chaim Ben Dov Be Zain Shal, Chulilaman Bagarayedin Taimanu Chasam Lachim Balarachamim, Yasti Rain Besesa Kanafab Yolamim, Vyesovas Chais Nishwasam Adonai Nachlasam, Yanuchu Bishlomish Kavam, Venamar Amen. To make a refuah shlema prayer. I'm aware of a number of people, not from our community, from other communities that are on ventilators and in hospital, and we wish them all a speedy and a full recovery. Mi sheber chavasenu Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Yivarech Rapes Achelim. Bavo Shanu Mispalim Bavo Ram Biz Chazakadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachim Aleichem Lachem Manafos Amishlach Lem Fushim Shemaim Lechol Ben Basos Shachal Yisrael Refuah Sanef Shvus Agov. Wishing everyone well. And refuah shlema to all those that are unwell. We wish long life to all those that would be saying Kaddish. Look after yourselves, keep safe, keep well. We are still open for business, both online and in the shul itself. Look after yourselves. Please God, we'll see you later in the week. Take care. All the very best. We're back to regular schedule tomorrow, so it will be 8:30. 8:30, yeah, 8:30 is the regular time.